All right, what is up, guys and girls? Today is day number 508 of Counting and Writing Challenge. Last time I left off at 501,000. As you can see there, 501,000. And today's February 12 and the year is 2025. And let us begin. Camera down. Start the timer. Make sure everything's good. All right, let's begin. 501,001. 501,002, 501,003, 501,004, 501,005, 501,006, 501,007, 501,008, 501,009, 501,010, 501,011, 501,012, 501,013, 501,014, 501,015, 501,016, 501,017, 501,018, 501,019, 501,020, 501,021, 501,022, 501,023, 501,024, 501,025, 501,026, 501,027, 501,028, 501,029, 501,030, 501,031, 501,032, 501,033, 501,034, 501,035, 501,036, 501,037, 501,038, 501,039, 501,040, 501,041, 501,042, 501,043, 501,044, 501,045, 501,046, 501,047, 501,048, 501,049, 501,050, 501,051, 501,052, 501,053, 501,054, 501,055, 501,056, 501,057, 501,058, 501,059, 501,060, 501,061, 501,062, 501,063, 501,064, 501,065, 501,066, 501,067, 501,068, 501,069, 501,070, 501,071, 501,072, 501,073, 501,074, 501,075, 501,076, 501,077, 501,078, 501,079, 501,080, 501,081, 501,082, 501,083, 501,084, 501,085, 501,086, 501,087, 501,088, 501,089, 501,090, 501,091, 501,092, 501,093, 501,094, 501,095, 501,096, 501,097, 501,098, 501,099, 501,100, 501,101, 501,102, 501,103, 501,104, 501,105, 501,106, 501,107, 501,108, 501,109, 501,110, 501,111, 501,112, 501,113, 501,114, 501,115, 501,116, 501,117, 501,118, 501,119, 501,120, 501,121, 501,122, 501,123, 501,124, 501,125, 501,126, 501,127, 501,128, 501,129, 501,130, 501,131, 501,132, 501,133, 501,134, 501,135, 501,136, 501,137, 501,138, 501,139, 501,140, 501,000, 501,141, 501,142, 501,143, 501,144, 501,145, 501,146, 501,147, 501,148, 501,149, 501,150, 501,151, 501,152, 501,153, 501,154, 501,155, 501,156, 501,157, 501,158, 501,159, 501,160, 501,161, 501,162, 501,163, 501,164, 501,165, 501,166, 501,167, 501,168, 501,169, 501,170, 501,171, 501,172, 501,173, 501,174, 501,175, 501,176, 501,177, 501,178, 501,179, 501,180, 501,181, 501,182, 501,183, 501,184, 501,185, 501,186, 501,187, 501,188, 501,189, 501,190, 501,191, 501,192, 501,193, 501,194, 501,195, 501,196, 501,197, 501,198, 501,199, 501,200, 501,201, 501,202, 501,203, 501,204, 501,205, 501,206, 501,207, 501,208, 501,209, 501,210, 501,211, 501,212, 501,213, 501,214, 501,215, 501,216, 501,217, 501,218, 501,219, 501,220, 501,221, 501,222, 501,223, 501,224, 501,225, 501,226, 501,227, 501,228, 501,229, 501,230, 501,231, 501,232, 501,233, 501,234, 501,235, 501,236, 501,237, 501,238, 501,239, 501,240, 501,241, 501,242, 501,243, 501,244, 501,245, 501,246, 501,247, 501,248, 501,249, 501,250, 501,251, 501,252, 501,253, 501,254, 501,255, 501,256, 501,257, 501,258, 501,259, 501,260, 501,261, 501,262, 501,263, 501,264, 501,265, 501,266, 501,267, 501,268, 501,269, 501,270, 501,271, 501,272, 501,273, 501,274, 501,275, 501,276, 501,277, 501,278, 501,279, 501,280, 501,281, 501,282, 501,283, 501,284, 501,285, 501,286, 501,287, 501,288, 501,289, 501,290, 501,291, 501,292, 501,293, 501,294, 501,295, 501,296, 501,297, 501,298, 501,299, 501,300, 501,301, 501,302, 501,303, 501,304, 501,305, 501,306, 501,307, 501,308, 501,309, 501,310, 501,311, 501,312, 501,313, 501,314, 501,315, 501,316, 501,317, 501,318, 501,319, 501,320, 501,321, 501,322, 501,323, 501,324, 501,325, 501,326, 501,327, 501,328, 501,329, 501,330, 501,331, 501,332, 501,333, 501,334, 501,335, 501,336, 501,337, 501,338, 501,339, 501,340, 501,341, 501,342, 501,343, 501,344, 501,345, 501,346, 501,347, 501,348, 501,349, 501,350, 501,351, 501,352, 501,353, 501,354, 501,355, 501,356, 501,357, 501,358, 501,359, 501,360, 501,361, 501,362, 501,363, 501,364, 501,365, 501,366, 501,367, 501,368, 501,369, 501,370, 501,371, 501,372, 501,373, 501,374, 501,375, 501,376, 501,377, 501,378, 501,376, 501,377, 501,378, 501,379, 501,380, 501,381, 501,382, 501,383, 501,384, 501,385, 501,386, 501,387, 501,388, 501,389, 501,390, 501,391, 501,392, 501,393, 501,394, 501,395, 501,396, 501,397, 501,398, 501,399, 501,400, 501,401, 501,402, 501,403, 501,404, 501,405, 501,406, 501,407, 501,408, 501,409, 501,410, 501,411, 501,412, 501,413, 501,414, 501,415, 501,416, 501,417, 501,417, 501,418, 501,419, 501,420, 501,421, 501,422, 501,423, 501,424, 501,425, 501,426, 501,427, 501,428, 501,429, 501,430, 501,431, 501,432, 501,433, 501,434, 501,435, 501,436, 501,437, 501,438, 501,439, 501,440, 501,441, 501,442, 501,443, 501,444. 501,445, 501,446, 501,447, 501,448, 501,449, 501,448, 501,440. 501,449, 501,450, 501,451, 501,452, 501,453, 501,454, 501,455, 501,456, 501,457, 501,458, 501,459, 501,460, 501,461, 501,462, 501,463, 501,464, 501,465, 501,466, 501,467, 501,468, 501,469, 501,470, 501,471, 501,472, 501,473, 501,474, 501,475, 501,476, 501,477, 501,478, 501,479, 501,480, 501,481, 501,482, 501,483, 501,484, 501,485, 501,486, 501,487, 501,488, 501,489, 501,490, 501,491, 501,492, 501,493, 501,494, 501,495, 501,496, 501,497, 501,498, 501,499, 501,500, 501,501, 501,502, 501,503, 501,504, 501,505, 501,506, 501,507, 501,508, 501,509, 501,510, 501,511, 501,512, 501,513, 501,514, 501,515, 501,516, 501,517, 501,518, 501,519, 501,520, 501,521. 501,522, 501,523, 501,524, 501,525, 501,526, 501,527, 501,528, 501,529, 501,530, 501,531, 501,532, 501,533, 501,534, 501,535, 501,536, 501,537, 501,538, 501,539, 501,540, 501,541, 501,542, 501,543, 501,544, 501,545, 501,546, 501,547, 501,548, 501,549, 501,550, 501,551, 501,552, 501,553, 501,554, 501,555, 501,556, 501,557, 501,558, 501,559, 501,560, 501,561, 501,562, 501,563, 501,564, 501,565, 501,566, 501,567, 501,568, 501,568, 501,569, 501,570, 501,571, 501,572, 501,573, 501,174. Wait. 501,573, 501,574, 501,575, 501,576, 501,577, 501,578, 501,579, 501,580, 501,580, 501,581, 501,581, 501,582, 501,583, 501,584, 501,585, 501,586, 501,000, 501,587, 501,588, 501,589, 501,590, 501,591, 501,592, 501,593, 501,594, 501,595, 501,596, 501,597, 501,598, 501,599, 501,599, 501,600, 501,601, 501,602, 501,603, 501,604, 501,605, 501,606, 501,607, 501,608, 501,609, 501,610, 501,611, 501,612, 501,613, 501,614, 501,615, 501,616, 501,617, 501,618, 501,619, 501,620, 501,621, 501,622, 501,623, 501,624, 501,625, 501,626, 501,627, 501,628, 501,629, 501,630, 501,631, 501,632, 501,633, 501,634, 501,635, 501,636, 501,637, 501,638, 501,639, 501,640, 501,641, 501,642, 501,643, 501,644, 501,645, 501,646, 501,647, 501,648, 501,649, 501,650, 501,651, 501,652, 501,653, 501,654, 501,655, 501,656, 501,657, 501,658, 501,659, 501,660, 501,661, 501,662, 501,663, 501,664, 501,665, 501,666, 501,667, 501,668, 501,669, 501,670, 501,671, 501,672, 501,673, 501,674, 501,675, 501,676, 501,677, 501,678, 501,679, 501,680, 501,681, 501,682, 501,683, 501,684, 501,685, 501,686, 501,687, 501,688, 501,689, 501,690, 501,691, 501,692, 501,693, 501,694, 501,695, 501,696, 501,697, 501,698, 501,699, 501,700, 501,701, 501,702, 501,703, 501,704, 501,705, 501,706, 501,707, 501,708, 501,709, 501,710, 501,711, 501,712, 501,713, 501,714, 501,715, 501,716, 501,717, 501,718, 501,719, 501,720, 501,721, 501,722, 501,723, 501,724, 501,725, 501,726, 501,727, 501,728, 501,729, 501,730, 501,731, 501,732, 501,733, 501,734, 501,735, 501,736, 501,737, 501,738, 501,739, 501,740, 501,741, 501,742, 501,743, 501,744, 501,745, 501,746, 501,747, 501,748, 501,749, 501,750, 501,751, 501,752, 501,753, 501,754, 501,755, 501,756, 501,757, 501,758, 501,759, 501,760, 501,761, 501,762, 501,763, 501,764, 501,765, 501,766, 501,767, 501,768, 501,769, 501,770, 501,771, 501,772, 501,773, 501,774, 501,775, 501,776, 501,777, 501,778, 501,779, 501,780, 501,781, 501,782, 501,783, 501,784, 501,785, 501,786, 501,787, 501,788, 501,789, 501,790, 501,791, 501,792, 501,793, 501,794, 501,795, 501,796, 501,797, 501,798, 501,799, 501,800, 501,801, 501,802, 501,803, 501,804, 501,805, 501,806, 501,807, 501,808, 501,809, 501,810, 501,811, 501,812, 501,813, 501,814, 501,815, 501,816, 501,817, 501,818, 501,819, 501,820, 501,821, 501,822, 501,823, 501,824, 501,825, 501,826, 501,827, 501,828, 501,829, 501,830, 501,831, 501,832, 501,833, 501,834, 501,835, 501,836, 501,837, 501,838, 501,839, 501,840, 501,841, 501,842, 501,843, 501,844, 501,845, 501,846, 501,847, 501,848, 501,849, 501,850, 501,851, 501,852, 501,853, 501,854, 501,855, 501,856, 501,857, 501,858, 501,859, 501,860, 501,861, 501,862, 501,863, 501,864, 501,865, 501,866. Just double check. 501,865, 501,866. 501,867, 501,868, 501,869, 501,870, 501,871, 501,872, 501,873, 501,874, 501,875, 501,876, 501,877, 501,878, 501,879, 501,880, 501,881, 501,882, 501,883, 501,884, 501,885, 501,886, 501,887, 501,888, 501,889, 501,890, 501,891, 501,892, 501,893, 501,894, 501,895, 501,896, 501,897, 501,898, 501,899, 501,900, 501,101, 501,102, 501,103, 501,104, 501,105, 501,106, 501,107, 501,108, 501,109, 501,110, 501,111, 501,112, 501,113, 501,114, 501,115, 501,116, 501,117, 501,118, 501,119, 501,120, 501,121, 501,122, 501,123, 501,124, 501,125, 501,126, 501,127, 501,128, 501,129, 501,129, 501,130, 501,131, 501,132, 501,133, 501,134, 501,135, 501,136, 501,137, 501,138, 501,139, 501,140, 501,141, 501,142, 501,143, 501,144, 501,145, 501,146, 501,147, 501,148, 501,149, 501,150, 501,151, 501,152, 501,153, 501,154, 501,155, 501,156, 501,157, 501,158, 501,159, 501,160, 501,161, 501,162, 501,163, 501,164, 501,164, 501,165, 501,166, 501,167, 501,168, 501,169, 501,170, 500, 1,171, 500, 1,172, 500, 1,173, 500, 1,174, 500, 1,175, 500, 1,176, 500, 1,177, 500, 1,000, 500, 500, 1,178, 500, 500, 1,179, 500, 1,180, 500, 1,181, 500, 1,182, 500, 1,183, 500, 1,184, 500, 1,185, 500, 1,186, 500, 1,187, 500, 1,188, 500, 1,189, 500, 1,190, 500, 1,190, 500, 1,191, 500, 1,192, 500, 1,193, 500, 1,194, 500, 1,195, 500, 1,196, 500, 1,197, 500, 1,197, 500, 500, 1,000, 500, 100, wait, 500, 1,998, 500, 1,198, 500, 1,999, 500, 1,001, 500, 1,999, 500, 2,000, 500, 1,999, 500, 2,000. All right. A little tongue twister action going on. But anyways, today's February 12th. The year is 2025. And here is 500, 2,000. As you can see there. 500, 2,000. And as always, guys and girls, thanks for watching. Have a good day, have a good night, and have a great and wonderful morning. As always, embrace your dreams. And this concludes day number 508 of Counting and Writing Challenge. Take care and bye-bye. Ciao.